This dividing line between one thing or another, it's right there in the book of Genesis. In that creation story, God is separating all manner of things. Separating the light from the dark, separating the day from the night, the waters from the waters, the heaven from the waters, the land from the waters. But here's the kicker. God did not separate the land from the water and say, you know what, I very much prefer the land. God did not separate the heavens from the waters, the night from the day, and say, I like the day so much better than I like the night. In that story of creation, after making a separation, God said, it is good. It is that dividing line that we have such a problem with. And to that end, I'm really glad that I'm working in Northern Virginia, because you, like I did when I was growing up in Delaware, you go to the beach. In Delaware, we went to the beach. A lot of you go to the Delaware beaches. I worked in the Diocese of Pennsylvania, which is around Philadelphia, for 10 years, and they don't go to the beach. They go, well, I hear some of you saying it, technically they go down the shore. Down the shore. They go to the shore. Do you know what the shore is? Literally, the shore is the dividing line between what is water and what is land. That part where it's hard to say and moves back and forth with the tides. You can see it where it's almost permanently wet, not the part that gets wet and then it dries out as the waves. That one line there where it's solid sand because it's wet, that's the shore. It's about a foot wide in most places. And if you've been to the Jersey Shore, you know that it feels like most of the East Coast has come into that 1 foot wide strip. It comes from the same word that we use for when we cut the hair off of sheep. We shear them, and the sheep is shorn. It's cut, it's divided, as if God came along with his great shears and said, this is going to be called water, this land. And it is good. You and I want to say, which is better? When I know one thing is different than the other, I need to know which is better, so I can elbow other people out of the way and get it before they do. I need to know which is best, which is worst. Which thing do I want to avoid? I want to judge. But like I said, there are some things that can be judged. You don't want to eat the rotten apple. For that matter, Adam and Eve in the other creation story were given, again in the words of the King James, dominion over the animals, weren't they? And the fields, and everything else. Perhaps our problem is not having judgment over those things which we have dominion over in the Old Testament language, but when we judge those things over which we do not, other human beings, that's not in our court. But who am I to judge? I've said that so many times, you probably have too. You probably have people in your life who say it all the time, those horrible, horrible people, but who am I to judge? But who am I to judge? When you say that, it's usually right after you've done a very good job at judging, thank you very much. And you just want to look a little more humble about the judgment in general. Oh, but who am I to judge? When what you really mean is, I am exactly the person to judge. I am better than her. I am better than him. I am better than that. I am better than them. And that's why I can judge her or him or that or them. But who am I to judge? I'm the right person to judge. That's who you're saying. And because I'm the right person to judge, after I've judged them and I'm superior than them, I can pluck them out of society, label them a weed, and toss them aside. Except then we run into this morning's gospel, where it says, no, absolutely not. We are not the judge. We are not the moral compass. We are not the reaper of the harvest. God is the sower, but we have the privilege to have been invited by God into God's act of sowing. We are co-creators with God in the sowing, solely the sowing, and on God's farm, at God's will, and in God's time. We have the privilege to have been invited by God into God's act of sowing, but never into the act of reaping. That's not our gig. Last week we talked about the sower, that parable of the sower and the field. That we are somehow connected with that is an amazing thing, responsible for the scattering, the broadcasting of the kernels of life all over the expanse that surrounds us. Seed falling through our fingers, flinging hither, thither, and yon. We are the sowers of the seed. And we know that that's God's preferred method of sowing, that broadcast method. And that it will encounter obstacles and failures, rocky soil, busy walkways, hungry birds looking for a snack, bad soil. Yet it is our task to broadcast no matter what. Cast it aloft, spread it around, only focused on the hope of the promise of more than 100-fold success from the seed which lands in the good soil by the grace and confidence in God's nurture, love, and growth. So there's a little surprise on our part this week when the gospel has confronted us with a field of mixed results. Healthy and weedy growing up together in the same plot, right next to each other. Wheat and tares, tares and wheat, to use the, again, King James Version. When I was in New York, there was a wonderful program, at least a well-meaning program, to take inner-city kids out of their environment to breathe fresh air, to see what the earth was like. And they sent them to farms and watched them know nothing about their environments for a little while. And after a full day of weeding in this one garden, one of the inner-city kids came back and looked really, really confused. And when one of the adults said, "Well, what's wrong?" He said, "Well, if you didn't want the weeds, why did you plant them there in the first place?" That's what the servant says in our parable this morning. Didn't you put good seed down? Where are all these weeds from? And this is a cunning combination, actually. This Greek word for weeds comes together with tares in the King James, but really is referring to a thing called bearded darnel in the current lexicon. It is in its early stages, immature stages, its growing stages. It appears just like wheat. Imagine that. It's not a bunch of dandelions in your tomatoes. This is a field, beautiful, looking all the same, golden brown, blowing in the breeze. And we can see that growth, and we're so happy about it in our deepest sower selves. And then we realize, oops, about half of it's weeds. You can only tell it's bearded darnel at fruit time, when it gets mature, and it's not wheat. What do we do with that? In our own gardens, we'd rip it out. We'd get rid of it. We'd get down and dirty and rip it all out. But it's not our garden. It's not our field. It's God's field. And the wheat and the tares, those weeds, they grow together. And at harvest, they will be separated, but by someone else, not us. Jesus says that is what the kingdom of God is like, wheat and tares together. Complex and complicated, this kingdom. Shouldn't surprise us. After all, we ourselves are complex and complicated. And our complexity and our complicatedness is something that God is very much aware of. After all, He made us, forgave us, calls us to service, blesses us, feeds us, forgives us again, heals us, chastises us, saves us. We, in and of ourselves, each of us individually, is a field of wheat and tares. I'm certain that there are things about yourself that you are aware of and are working on to make yourself healthier in body, mind, and spirit. I know there are things about myself that I keep aware of. When I sink to my knees, I count them, name them, lift them up. And if each of us have that going on inside, And then we are all put together in the community that is the church. Well, that's going to be one complicated church. One complex place. And that's obvious when a whole society of pain, malaise, and sadness scars our world. It's not our task to be the one to pluck out the weeds, as hard as that is to believe. It's our job to sow. Because if you were to pluck out a weed, we're not just plucking out items about ourselves, we're talking about people. Last week we were wondering what kind of soil we ourselves were when that story was told. This morning, perhaps when you say there's good seed and there's bad seed sown among us, perhaps the temptation is, what kind of seed is my neighbor? Can I tear them out, throw them out? But we don't know which one is the weed and which one is the wheat. As it said in our Genesis reading, after Jacob wakes up, he has this realization and he says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." Who am I to know which is wheat and which is tare? As it said in the psalm this morning, God can do that, but we can't. Darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light to you are both alike. Not so much to me. Who am I to judge? No one. Who is God to judge? Well, God. As Father Tim mentioned last week, some parables are harder for us to grasp because unlike Jesus' original audience, we, for the most part, aren't scribes, aren't shepherds, and certainly aren't farmers. Most of us are so far from farmers that we get mixed up, even to the point of forgetting that the roots support us, not the other way around. Who am I to judge? I am no one to judge, because I am as complex and complicated as everyone else. Who am I to sow? I am the hands and feet and eyes and ears and heart and body of God at work in this world, just like you are. And we have this seed to broadcast. The wheat and the tares will grow together. Your wheat and your tares will grow together, as will mine. And together we will get on our knees and pray for forgiveness, strength, healing, and we will be fed and refit for the sowing we have yet to do. And we will do that as a church community for the church community. And we will do that as a diocese for our diocese and as an Anglican communion for the health and mission of the broadcasting of the seed word of God to the whole world. We will do that as we look out over the world and see that turmoil and pain. We will pray for the strength to sow more seeds of God's love and peace and salvation and grace and balm and justice. We will pray for the patience not to go and yank out a wade when we see it or think we see it. We will sow the seed and pray the weeds, and God will do the rest.